All right, in honor of those that made it here on time, I think it's good for us to start. So I would like to call the annual meeting for the February 25, 2025 to order for the Addison Central School District. My name is Barbara Wilson. I'm the chair of the ACSD School Board. What I'm going to do is start us, and then once we have voted on our moderator, then I'm going to turn it over to the moderator, okay? So, looking, if you want to follow along with me, I'm in the annual report on page 6, and it says, the legal voters of the Addison Central School District are hereby warned to meet at the Middlebury Union High School in Middlebury, Vermont on Tuesday, February 25, 2025 at 7 p.m. to transact the following business. Article 1 is to elect the following officers. A is a moderator, B is a treasurer, and C is a clerk. So at this point, I would like nominations for a moderator. And if you could please state your name and the town you reside in first, that would be awesome.
Lynn Doolin in Middlebury. I nominate Jim Douglas.
Okay.
I'll second it.
And a second, and that's Mary Gill. Okay. Any other nominations? Just waiting here. Seeing none, then let's go ahead and vote. All those in favor of electing Jim Douglas as our moderator for another year, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Douglas. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks to all the board members for their hard work and leadership during the year. This evening, of course, we're welcoming our new superintendent of schools, Dr. Wendy Baker. It's great to have you, and glad you're aboard, and I look forward to hearing from you just a little later on. Well, as Barbara indicated, the next item of business is the election of a treasurer. Are there nominations for the office of district treasurer?
I nominate Michelle Warren.
Michelle Warren is nominated. Is there a seconded by Suzanne for Michelle's nomination? Are there any other nominations for treasurer? Seeing none, all in favor of electing Michelle Warren as our treasurer, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and we have re-elected Michelle. We'll now proceed to the election of a clerk. Are there nominations for the office of clerk? Suzanne.
Mary Gill, please.
Mary Gill is nominated for the office of clerk. Is there a second? Seconded? Several. Any other nominations for clerk? Seeing none, all in favor of electing Mary Gill as our clerk, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and we have elected Mary for another year. Thank you both. Article 2, to hear and act upon the reports of the school district officers. We have online and hard copies of the district's annual report. We'll, of course, get into a financial discussion in our informational meeting that follows the business of the annual meeting. But are there any questions about anything otherwise in the report that's been distributed?
That's not Article 2 in the report.
No? On the warning?
This looks like last year.
The warning and the budget book warning do not match.
Oh, well, is this maybe a copy from last year? Do we have to elect a
We don't.
Hannaford?
We did that last year.
Yeah,
We
I
did
think
that
that's-
last year.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's not accurate in the printed document.
Yeah.
That was from last year, where every 3-ish years, I think, we elect someone to represent the school district to serve on the Hannaford Career Center Board, but this is not that year. So we'll ignore Article 2 as printed in the book. Thank you for I was using a different document, as you can tell. So we'll proceed to Article 3 as printed in the warning, which is to hear and act upon the reports of the school district officers. And again, I'll invite any questions about any of the material that's been distributed, understanding that the financial material will be discussed in just a few minutes. Anything else? If not, I entertain a motion to accept the. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, go right ahead.
I'm Diane Bain from Bridgeport,
Yes,
and
ma'am.
I have a strong objection. We are apparently being given color copies tonight, and I won't get it from the school board offices. It is not colored, and it's very difficult to understand from the tank color. It's very black and white, very difficult to understand.
Thank you.
If you're going to have one copy, please do it in color.
The administration is making note of that concern. Well, thank you.
No, because now I've gone through.
Any other questions about the material that has been distributed? If not, we have a motion to accept this is not necessarily approving, but to accept the reports of the officers of the district. They probably shouldn't make it. Motion to accept the reports? Well,
This is.
okay. Pardon?
I accept. Oh my God, it is colored.
Okay. Well, motion to accept the reports of the officers, is there a second? Thank you. Any discussion or questions? If not, all in favor of accepting the officers' reports, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and we've accepted our school district officers' reports. Article 4, to see if the voters of the Addison Central School District will vote to authorize its Board of Directors under 16 BSA Section 562(9) to borrow money by issuance of bonds or notes not in excess of anticipated revenue for the school year. What's your pleasure regarding Article 4? Moved and seconded to authorize the board to borrow in anticipation of revenue. Any questions or discussion on that article?
Jim,
Yep.
every year this comes up and there's some question. We don't always borrow every year, but especially with some of the changes in the different towns as to when they collect taxes, we may not always they don't get the tax revenue in order to distribute it to us. And so we need to borrow to cover that interval.
Short term, yeah.
And that's happened at times from Middlebury because they've gone to 2 times a year to collect taxes.
So a timing question based on the receipts from the town. So. Any other questions or discussion on the article?
I see who agreed to the first. I know Mr. Chance did this.
Yeah, Chip. No.
Okay, thank you.
You ready for the question? So all in favor of adopting Article 4, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We've adopted Article 4. Article 5, to do any other business proper to come before said meeting. We have an election coming up next week, perhaps you are aware, and we traditionally invite those who are candidates for school district positions to introduce themselves at our annual meeting, and I welcome anyone who wants to do that at this point to say hello.
Sure. Yeah. I know many of you, my name is Ron Ratcliffe. I'm a Middlebury parent, educator, activist. I've been teaching and around public education for many, many years now. And I've been following some developments on the national and the state level, and really want to get
involved in helping connect some of the concerns of the community with what's going on at the administrative level. So that's me.
Other, yes, sir.
I just wanted to, my name's Vance, by the way, and I'm also running for a seat on the school board. And primarily, I just wanted to make sure everyone knew how thankful I am that you do this. It seems pretty thankless. I'm wondering why I'm doing this. But I've met Jess. I've not met you before, Mark, but like Ron, not Mark what?
Ron
Macklin, sorry about that. Ron, but I know that if either of you are running, that, you know, we're in good hands, and that's really all I wanted to say and introduce myself as running. Thanks.
I'm also one of the candidates. I know many people in the room. My name's Jess Bennett Novak. I use they, them pronouns, and just echoing what Ron and Jan said, just like very grateful and honored to be with these two and the rest of the folks running this year, and always grateful to the school board. I'm also a military parent, have a 6th grader and a toddler in the district, and just excited to hopefully work with folks up here and folks in the crowd. So, thanks.
Steve Orzek, long-term serving member of the board. I'm running for re-election this year. I was part of the consolidation when we changed from an SU to an SD. So I've been on the board for a while. I've had a lot of experience. I was chair of negotiations this last time around. I've been on the finance committee, policy committee, and spent a lot of time in the schools. I am a retired teacher, and really would look forward to continue serving with the district. Thank you.
Jim,
Oh, sorry. Lynn?
I'm just a poor elderly person whose hearing aids are broken and I can't hear. Do you have a microphone for some people? Sir, I couldn't hear what you were saying. I'm sorry. But is that available tonight?
There is one up at the, so it's sitting right on the podium. And so.
Right here. But it's for, I think it's for broadcast, not amplification.
It doesn't, no.
I think we're going to have to use our outside voices.
Thanks. Yeah, just so you're all aware of it, might help me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Steve?
I'm sorry you weren't able to hear me. I'll be happy to talk to you afterwards if you'd like.
Well, we should be sensitive to that. There are a few of us who are more mature. So we'll all try to speak up if we can. Other candidates?
Not a candidate.
Oh, sorry. Barbara.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to, and I'll use my big voice. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the fact that we have a couple board members who will no longer be serving on the board. They've decided to step down. And the first one is Chip Malcolm. And Chip, I mean, I'm sure folks, you know, have seen Chip on the board, you know, for many, many, many years. He's been with ACSD since 2016, and so he's just completing his 9th year, right, Chip? And then prior to that, he served on the UD3 board from 1985 to 2000, which is an amazing number of years of community service. And we are really just wishing him the best as he moves forward. And would appreciate if folks would just join me in giving him a round of applause. Because we like to embarrass him, you know. And in addition, Joanna Doria, she is also decided not to run for another term. Joanna is from Ripton, and she's been on the board since 2022. During that time, she served on the Policy Committee, Communications and Engagement Committee, and Facilities. And she's also been the board rep to the Addison Central Special Education Parent Advisory Council. And so if everyone could also give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb, and thank you, Joanna and Chip, for your dedicated service to our district. Chip will take a few years off and come back for another round, probably. Again. Well, any other candidate announcements?
No candidates, but I
Okay.
would like to take a moment to thank Sophia Lawton, our outgoing senior student representative. She will be graduating in the spring, so she will not join us next year. But she's done a great job representing students and keeping us in touch with the student perspective. So I just want to thank her for her service.
Thank you. Any other business or announcements? If not, entertain a motion to adjourn the annual meeting. Moved and seconded. Seconded. Eric? All in favor of adjourning the annual meeting, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We'll now move into the twilight zone, I guess. To our public information hearing. The legal voters of the Addison Central School District are hereby warned to meet at the Middlebury Union High School in Middlebury, Vermont on Tuesday, February 25th, 2025 at 7 p.m. for a public information meeting. Articles warned for vote on Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. The hearing will take place immediately following adjournment of the annual meeting of said district, which we've just achieved. There are 3 articles for the voters next Tuesday at their respective polling places. Article 1 is, shall the voters of the Addison Central School District approve the school board to expend $51,719,284, which is the amount the school board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. The Addison Central School District estimates that this proposed budget, if approved, will result in per pupil education spending of $15,098, which is 6.22% lower than the per pupil education spending for the current year. Article 2, shall the voters of the Addison Central School District vote to authorize the ASCD School Board to appropriate $1,297,237 of the FY 2024 unassigned fund balance to the ASCD Capital Reserve Fund. And then the third article is to elect 5 school directors from the nominees to serve on the board, 3 from Middlebury, 1 from Ripton, and 1 from Weybridge. And we've had introductions by candidates a few minutes ago. Articles 1 and 2 are both related to the budget, so I think we can have a discussion of them together. And I'd like to invite Superintendent Baker to start our discussion of the fiscal 2026 budget.
So while they work the tech out, I'll do the low-tech version. How is my voice carrying? Okay? Good. It's a pleasure to be here. And I will say that prior to becoming a superintendent and doing all those important things, I was a middle school teacher and a middle school principal. So it's that voice that I'll invoke tonight to make sure that I'm able to be heard. I just want to say to begin that it's been a pleasure to become part of Addison Central School District. It's been a wild year in terms of state and federal turnover administratively, and you know, some of the things that the district has worked through after a couple of years of transition in superintendents, and but this board has been a wonderful board to work for. It's been great to get to know the team, that's here. There are a couple of them here. In a minute, you're going to hear from our Director of Finance and Operations, Matt Corrente, and Courtney Cron, our Director of Teaching and Learning, is here as well. We are proud to present, I think, our work to you tonight. And by saying our work, it really is work. This budget took 7 months to create, which is different from most of the budgets that many of you, if you have attended this meeting, have worked through in the past. The board felt very strongly that when the new superintendent, everything waited for the new superintendent to come, right? That was the thought. So when the new superintendent came, one of the things that was going to be a focal point was that we had a way of distributing our resources more equitably among our 9 schools. In some sort of a use of maybe a formula or something that would make some sense, that would feel like that's been intended to in an intentional way. So that goal was set by the board on my first day, on June 1st last year, and we've worked toward that ever since. So, what we will be talking about tonight is the process as well as the goals, of doing that. And Matt will take you through some of the numbers that go with that. But I know that the process and the point, I think, is what I want to make sure we were able to get across tonight. So in some of the things that we have projected here, for those who can't be in the room, but also for those who might just appreciate looking visually, are some priorities and some strategies. So there were 3 priorities in terms of building our budget for this year. One of them was to strengthen student success. You might know that the board has a strategic plan that has 3 goals: belonging, access, and student success. Which means that now that we're out of the pandemic and we're into a place where we're able to focus more squarely on getting us back to an academic sense of excellence that we recognize more readily, it's time to focus on doing that and doing that in our kind of universal classrooms so that we're able to strengthen our opportunities there. And during the pandemic, right, we had disruption everywhere. And I think social disruption, academic disruption, behavioral disruptions, and it's I think the system feels like it's time now where we can kind of focus again. And so that was a budget priority. How can we arrange things to do that? And then we had student services programs that had grown quite a bit, in part because there was an Addison County collaborative for programs that provided alternative pathways for learners that needed that. That Addison Northwest, the Mount Abe School District, and Addison Central partnered in together. At the end of last year, that fell apart. And so there were a number of programs that we were the fiscal agent, and so then we held the programs, and we made sure that the kids got the services and so on and so forth, but obviously we can't carry that forward. That's not a way that it was never meant to operate with just one district in that way, and so we needed to come kind of out of that, and also out of the ESSER funding that had been provided to the district that, given the superintendent transitions, we hadn't quite reconciled with. So those were 2 things that needed to be streamlined so that we're back into a place that feels right-sized for where we are in serving students that had particular difficulties or need for alternative approaches to learning. And the ensuring equitable resource distribution I talked about a little bit. So we had some strategies that related to help us getting there. One of them was a zero-basis budgeting. In years past, you might have seen what they call an index budgeting approach, where someone in a position like mine might have said, well, we're going to go with a 4% increase, right, or a 5% increase, or something of that nature. So you're taking the expenditures that you have, basically the way that you've spent them, and you've added an index to that represents what you feel is what the community can best afford. In this case, we chose something very different. We chose to go right back down to 0 and put all of our expenses aside and then put them back one by one based on what we felt was needed today in order to move forward. And Matt's going to lead you through that process so that we literally built that with this board and with this board's patience and guidance and years of experience. And it's a model that I think we will be able to use as long as the legislature allows us to, which is a different topic, of course. But in any case, that's something that you'll hear about tonight. We also took a look at our class size equity. In some places in the district, we had class sizes of 6, and in some places we had class sizes of 25. And that was sort of universally understood to be something we had to take a look at together, so that we're understanding that kids have the opportunity to learn in class sizes that promote good learning environments, exchange of ideas, balanced membership, and so forth, and also that teaching loads were equitable across the district. Matt will also show you tonight work that he's done to try to help with transparency to say, all right, how much, for example, does transportation cost per student? How much do the meals cost per student? You know, so that, because that's understandable, right? We can relate to those things. And so part of what we did was take a look at that and determine, do things feel relatively in balance? Or if not, is it something that we want to fix in this year, or is it something that we want to think about for future years? You know, so he'll show you that. And then he'll show you the way in which we've categorized expenses, like operations and tuition payments and things like that in categories that hopefully will feel like they're clear and they're transparent about what might be in there, you know, and what that looks like. So my message really to you as the community of voters is that we heard that we need to ensure financial feasibility. The board gave us a 2% target of our top line to begin to work with and back into to provide property relief. That might be within our control to provide. You know, the legislature, of course, sets the tax rates. That's in the end. You know, we don't have final say about those things. And we tried to work toward strategic plan priorities in a process that was transparent and clear and accountable to the public. So in that way, we're very proud of our work that we're able to share with you tonight, and we appreciate your questions. So I'm going to let Matt run through those pieces with you, and perhaps Reverend Douglas and I could find a seat while he does that. Yep.
Sounds great. Anybody that can't hear well, move more toward the speaker.
I've never been a teacher before, so or a governor.
That voice, you're speaking of commands like you were.
So if I taper off,
Then I would raise my hand to
okay,
get you back on track.
please, thank you.
I thought getting near the camera was what I wanted to do.
Yeah, it's a tough choice tonight. Thank you to Dr. Baker for walking me into this presentation. And way back in September, we started our presentations to the board, as we do each fall, talking about the cost drivers that we are identifying, which kind of set the scene for the budget landscape as things start to unfold in our development process. Here we brought forth a few of those drivers, not all. The budget book that you're holding has a more thorough list, but these major cost drivers were largely the strategic plan implementation, which is in a closed system, and we were very much operating in a closed system because of growth constraints, right? We couldn't just add as much new expense as possible to this budget. We were given a 2% target, so that allowed us to add a little bit, but we also had a lot of things to absorb with that 2%. And so in that closed system, trying to implement the strategic plan meant that expenses were going to be shifty, right? Moving from A to B. And when we talked about class size equity and consolidation of class sizes, freeing up money for reinvestment, that's really how the strategic plan implementation drove our budget process this year. The big two, wages and healthcare, are there. Healthcare has been going up at the statewide collectively bargained level, more than 10% per year. Last year it was 16.7%, so we felt happy to only be going up 11.9% this year in healthcare costs, but it's still a major increase. We also, based on negotiated contracts with the teachers and support staff, as well as our projected non-union salary expenses, are looking at about $1.8 million in new salary dollars to absorb in FY26. Last year, under the 11th hour mayhem of the yield bill and Act 183, the tax rate discount ultimately became the 5-cent discount ultimately became a discount that was based or scaled to disadvantage. And so we started with a 13-cent tax rate discount last year, but it's built to taper by 20% each year. So our tax rate discount of 13 cents will, in FY26, be a 10-cent discount. So that has had an effect on the budget costs. As we've mentioned, the board working with us on those drivers, working with Chip on the finance committee, longtime leader of the finance committee, sort of tried to get our finger on what growth would look like. We knew that if we just let the drivers drive, we would probably be headed towards a 6% budget, those major drivers and some of the other minor ones. So 6% was sort of the do-nothing level service approach to our spending plan. We knew that that was going to push us towards an excess spending threshold, towards the edge of double taxation for any dollars that went above that threshold, and towards unsustainability. And so we set a lower target, which backed us away from that edge of 2% budget growth and kind of operated with that top line number in mind as we were moving the furniture out on the lawn and trying to put it all back in a way that made more sense. So, as I just mentioned, 6% was sort of the level service, do-nothing rollover approach. If we think about it in broad strokes, we took 2% of that and brought it forward as spending growth. We realized 2% savings by reduction of FTEs, personnel side of things, and then we realized another 2% reduction through non-personnel calibration. That could be the calibration of contracts and purchase services. It could be the calibration of benefits lines. It could be the calibration of supply lines. Just sort of a lot of little things adding up to a right sizing of the budget based on FY24's performance and our projection for how that would look next year. We haven't gone into a ton of detail in this presentation on the ins and outs of the positional changes, what was sunset, what was created. The reason for that is that it was exhaustively detailed in all of the draft budget presentations to the school board, which are available on the website, and the best resource for going into depth on those. I will say that, as Dr. Baker mentioned, the position changes largely reflected the ESSER-related positions who, because funding sunset last year, and those positions were carried over in kind of our FY25 bridge budget plan. I think that was the main theme of this year's spending plan, was a bridge between ESSER and the recovery era post-ESSER, between superintendencies, and between the board not having a strategic plan and now having one, right? So we've bridged, and now we're on the other side of the bridge. We were able to find efficiency in sunsetting some of those ESSER positions to look at class size calibration and equitable staffing. And then we have some positions which we wanted to hire this year, best laid plans, but those positions, for one reason or another, are unfilled or vacant, and were able to be consolidated as a way of reducing FTEs without having to reduce any of our actual employees. The net effect of position creation and reduction was an overall reduction of 9.2 FTEs in this plan. Okay. Now I'm worried because the thing is going to get really small on the screen. And so you have to choose between seeing and hearing. If you have a budget book in your hands, you will have these graphics as well. I cannot tell you off the top of my head which page to turn to, but a lot of, thank you, Hugh. A lot of these are pulled directly from the budget book, so there's continuity there, and it's easier to see. For my presentation of the expense budget, we're going to look at the two new tools that we worked with this year, stacking and price tags first, and then we'll look at a traditional expense budget by cost center, which is the same 10 cost centers that we have historically used, and sort of the traditional way that the budget is presented. It's also what we send to the state for their metrics and data collection. So we started stacking because we said, even though we have 10 cost centers, we have money that gets used for a variety of reasons in the budget. There are these fundamental costs of keeping the lights on and meeting the legal obligations of running a district by having a fiscal team, a facilities director, a tech director, a tech team, food service team, transportation contracts, and our existing debt service that are really this foundational expense group, not really negotiable or not subject to major changes programmatically from year to year. So we called those Block 1 operations expenses and built those in first. Each part of Block 1 was gone through for that 2% non-personnel comb that I mentioned earlier to say, let's make sure that what's in Block 1 was actually what we spent in FY24 is well calibrated to that usage. And so it was a full audit. Not everything in Block 1 was just rolled over, but that was our foundational block that we plugged in first. Block 2 is a little bit different because it relates to tuition payments, which are rates set by organizations outside of ACSD. So the Hannaford Career Center is in charge of setting their tuition rate, and then the universal pre-K rate is also set annually. And so because those two things influence the annual tuition expense, we gave them their own block as Block 2 tuition.
What is PAHCC?
Patricia Allen Hannaford Career Center.
Patricia A.
Ann?
Career.
Ann.
It's the Career Center.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Patricia, for missing a pen. These, I will mention that these blocks are not to scale, but Block 3 is the biggest one. Because Block 3 is what we call the block of requirements. This is where we place the personnel requirements generated by federal and state laws or rules, as well as the ACSD board policy. So anything that creates a requirement for a person in a position lives in Block 3. This is largely direct instruction. I will just, as a caveat, say that none of the student services personnel are in here because they all have their own separate block in Block 5. So Block 3 is personnel not associated with student services, but in a direct instruction role as required. Block 4 was broken out because that does not include the salary and benefits of those personnel. These are the non-salary and benefit materials, supplies, and services that augment the salary and benefits that we pay for our employees. And so that's block 4. By breaking it out from salary and benefits, it gave us control over some price tagging and some evening out of allocations to say, let's make sure that supply budgets look even across elementary schools and make sense for middle and high school. And we went from there. Block 5 is student services, including all of special education, which has its own block because it has its own census block grant. It has its own level of federal legal mandates and rules and regulations that we have to follow, and it was really important to keep that separate. It's historically been kept separate, and we had to maintain that for a variety of reasons. Block 6 and 7 are new blocks that represent some, well, not all new, but certainly newly presented investments. So block 6 is student opportunity funds. This is where we said everything that's not a requirement but is provided for the sake of enriching or providing opportunity to our students is going to live in block 6. It could be the $25 per elementary school student field trip budget that we set forth. Or this year we added an allocation for all 5th graders to attend a nature camp at Keewaydin as a melding activity in between the transition from their elementary school into MUMS the following year. We have also included here high school activities and athletics, which are an opportunity that we provide our students. The last thing that's sort of a major in Block 6 is IB as a curriculum. It's an opportunity that we provide our students. It has an expense associated with it, and it helps enrich the educational product that we provide at ACSD, so it's been placed in Block 6 as an opportunity. I'm going to do the last one, and then.
No, just don't use letters. I'm not used to that. I don't know what letters mean. If you could just say what it is, that would be very helpful. I don't know what IB is.
Okay, International Baccalaureate. I apologize.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's our curriculum that we purchased and implement at all of our schools, and covers everybody from kindergarten up through 12th grade.
Matt, what is AMS or supplemental? I mean, I'm on page 21.
Yep.
And it says supplemental AMS.
AMS is arts, movement, and Spanish.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, yeah.
They're all important to me.
As people steeped in acronyms, it is sometimes hard to remember that not everybody speaks this language, and I'm happy to help be a glossary for anything that pops up. Block 7 is our last block to cover here as we move from 0 up to that $51.7 million target that you can see on the left side there. In equity investments, we're taking some of the money that was freed up from class size consolidation and identified as available to reinvest and set up as targeted performance-based investments in identifying and addressing the inequity that we have found across the district. That largely takes the form of instructional coaches and intervention resources, as well as I think a curriculum coordinator.
Those resources are designed to respond to state testing results. So where we see students that need some additional assistance, those resources are designed to
Oh,
support
it
that.
makes sense. It's just that I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What is bird shore?
Bridport and Shoreham.
What?
Bridport and Shoreham.
Oh,
There's a dash, there's a line there between them. Yeah, it's probably hard to see in the light, so.
no, I see it, but I have no clue.
I'm not going to go into a ton of detail on this next chart, but it was, I think, an important visual for the sake of understanding how the blocks, as we've just looked at them here, are actually broken out in each one of our schools. And in order to do that, we had to make some assumptions, especially with regards to how student services were distributed. This is distributed just based on enrollment and not on actual student services for the sake of maintaining student privacy, for instance.
It's page 43 for those that are following in their book.
But it does give you kind of an idea of the makeup of how those blocks appear in each school. I'll point to, tuition, for example, because tuition is either the Career Center, which you can see as the large orange block there, borne by the high school, or universal pre-K payments to third-party providers who are providing preschool to our youngest students. That's prorated across all the elementary schools. So that's just one way that we, or two ways, for instance, that we split up some of those expenses across the schools. And the detail of how those splits happen is included in your budget book. The next tool to talk about are price tags. And as Dr. Baker alluded to, price tags are really, I think, an important new way of looking at our expenses, something that I'm looking forward to doing more of each year, because they take big numbers like $51.7 million and break them down into much smaller numbers, which are much easier to understand, much easier to compare across different areas of the budget. And I think it's a tool that helps us spot areas where we would like to find efficiency. One of the examples at a equity budgeting workshop that I attended was a school district in Texas that noticed that I think it was the cheerleading budget was $2,000 per pupil at their school, and was, more than $1,700 more than what the price tag was for every other activity that they offered. And the reason had nothing to do with what was actually happening with the cheerleading club, but it was the fact that it happened during a school period, and the teacher contracts were such that they wound up paying sort of more of a per diem rate than an after-school club stipend rate for the activity. And by digging into the price tag, they identified that and were able to justify the expense or make a change to when it was scheduled or something like that.
Just Matt.
Yep.
It's on page 21 for those that want to see it all on one page. It's a little bit easier than the folks that are seeing it on the Zoom slide.
And can we clarify, these price tag totals here are per student numbers that we're looking at?
Yes.
Thank you.
Per weighted student. Stomach, not lungs.
Per weighted?
No,
No.
they're not per weighted student.
Per weighted, yeah. Weighted student.
Per weighted student?
Yeah.
Okay, you changed it.
For one yourself.
Are there any questions on the price tags before I keep moving? So the next slide is the top half of the general financial summary.
This is on page 22 and 23.
And here you can see our traditional cost centers, everything from general ed, student services, including special education, universal pre-K, the PAHCC, transportation, that's our annual bus contract, school bus contract, facilities, so the repair, maintenance, and custodial aspects of the district, tech, which is the technology department, so the network infrastructure, device purchasing and maintenance, and software costs associated with the district. The board and administration, so this is the budget for the school board and for the superintendent's office, including the administrative and fiscal teams within the district office. And we also hold a 1.5% of general fund contingency, which is $450,000 within that board and administration cost center. PD and C is professional development and curriculum. That's the budget cost center administered by the Director of Teaching and Learning, and deals with professional development and curriculum implementation. And the last little one is debt. These are outstanding debts held by the district on an annual repayment cycle. I will point out quickly that debt has gone down because a loan has matured in Bridport, and so it's all paid off, and we are now seeing a 31% decrease in our debt service. Not that we hold a ton of debt service, but it's gone down.
Matt, how many different buildings do we have debt on still?
5.
5, huh?
5, yeah. It could be 4. I think it's 5.
Okay.
But small amounts.
Small amounts, yeah. I'm thinking, it's like, are we gonna see an equivalent drop next year is where I was going. I don't think so.
A lot of them are wrapping up in the next couple years, so there's not a ton left, and as they taper, it becomes more principal heavy, less interest heavy, and so it kind of drops off fast. The additional funds / food service are funds that we allocate for the difference between what we receive in reimbursements through federal and state food service grants and what our total costs are. And so generally speaking, we spend about $1.6 million on food service, and we receive about $1.3 million in reimbursements. That creates a general fund line item of $300,000.
A note about that is that relates to the Universal Meals Program. So we provide breakfast and lunch for all students, regardless of students' ability to pay. That's just something that's provided. The extra $300,000 represents the fact that our wages are higher for our food service workers than the state assumes that they might be when they calculate the reimbursement, and also our costs for food are higher than the state calculation. However, our food service program is excellent, and the students is very heavily used by our students, and so it's a point of pride.
I'll briefly mention student services and general ed as far as their year-to-year change. At the onset, we talked about streamlining student services. Here we see a 27% increase year-to-year. How can both of those things be true? Student services was subject to 2 things. One was the inheritance of the collaborative programs that were operated as a cooperative between Addison Central, Addison Northwest, and Mount Abe, based on budget constraints in the northern districts and participation and other factors. They pulled out of those collaboratives, leaving us with the expenses. So instead of having just 1/3 of the share to budget for, we had 100% of the cost to budget for that added. We also migrated a lot of things into student services that had previously been in general ed. There was a transfer of paraeducator positions, for instance, from one cost center to the other, as well as the identification of interventionists within student services who hadn't been identified there before. So a lot of the swing between general ed and student services was a migration factor and not a cut and add kind of factor.
An important note about that might be that the federal regulations have changed in the last couple of years, allowing for greater eligibility for special education, and our population has gone up about 7% in terms of, we have about 22% of our student population that are eligible for special education services, and that's an increase of about 7%, you know, in a short period of time. So this is a bit of a rectifying of that, a clear look at that, so that we can then begin taking a look at that system and determining how we can move forward to make sure we're effective but efficient in our approach.
What percentage of your student body receives special education services?
About 22%.
22.
Yeah, which is an increase of 7% in the last couple of years. So that's something we'll be looking very carefully at as we continue through this year and into next year. Yeah.
Rounding out the expense budget are our grants here. We have our consolidated federal grants, which is the title grants. We receive Title I, Title II, and Title IV grants. That expense is projected to see an 8% decrease. We also receive special ed federal grants. That's the IDEA-B grant. We're projected to see a 9% increase in allocation there. And then Medicaid and MAC are federal grants that the state receives and administers, so it kind of has this federal/state hybrid nature to it. We're projecting a 30% uptick there, which is just kind of bringing that line in line with what we've seen as over the last couple of years, actually. The thing about federal grants and Medicaid is that they are allocations where we will always match our expenditures to our revenues. So what we receive as revenue, we want to use every dollar of that grant. And so the investments that we place in them ensures that they're all used. And so an 8% decrease in title grants is not an election to spend less in title grants. It's that our federal allocation is going to go down by 8%, so we will have 8% less spending capacity. But those are all revenues and expenses will match each other, as we'll see in the revenue section in a minute. I added the fund balance transfer in here because that is the last piece of the expense profile. Each year we have a previous year fund balance that we move through, so it exists as both an expense and a revenue. Comes in as a revenue, leaves to go to capital reserves or ed reserves or somewhere as an expense, and cancels itself out. With that, we have represented every dollar that the school district is projected to spend in FY26. Federal, state, local, and fund balance. All of it is represented in that $51.719 million. That total expense growth is a tidy 2%, which was what the board's target was, and something that we are proud of being able to achieve. That's expense. Any questions?
I have a concern that I don't know when it would be appropriate to raise it. I've been an educator most of my life. I've taught, so I'm really on your side. But I have a real concern. I'm 81 years old, and I'm being taxed out of my home. The rising taxes are hurting me. Having said that, I have a general question which will not be settled here tonight. It's just food for thought. I really wonder whether transportation is education that I want to pay for. Nothing more needs to be said than that.
Could you speak up, please? You're
Sorry,
facing that way.
Yes, I should. I said, I really wonder whether transportation is education, and is it something I want to pay for? I'm seeing buses, large buses, with no students in them. And it just startles me every time I see it. But it's food for thought. Is transportation part of a taxpayer's responsibility It's a complicated question with a complicated answer, and I know that. And the other aspect of things that I don't hope to understand, and all of you do much better than I do, but how do we even put this? Is teachers' health care something that the taxpayers should be responsible for? I negotiate my own health coverage, and it puts the taxpayer at a tremendous disadvantage, and you too. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but why can't the union negotiate with the healthcare insurance companies? Your getting involved puts the taxpayer at a distinct disadvantage. And I don't know how to solve that. I have no suggestions on how to solve. I'm not resentful of what you've done, not at all. But I just think that we really need to take a look at those two things.
And I will just add that healthcare was traditionally bargained at a local level, and it was only recently that they elected to move to statewide bargaining, the state and the state union.
I question whether it belongs in the contract at all.
As we dive into revenues, I wanted to first point out that the revenues sources are the same as the expenses. So, money comes in and money goes out. Here we have a graphic to show what offsetting revenues means, right? So we have our ed spending, which is the amount that we're going to need to raise by property taxes. In order to figure out what that is, we have to back some offsetting revenues out first, because they can't count towards education spending. So we back out our federal grants, that's the Title and Idea B grants that I just described earlier. We back out Medicaid and the state census block grant, which is a special education grant that we receive categorically for our students. We also receive a consolidation grant and a transportation grant from the state. So all of those state grants get backed out of ed spending. We also do not count the fund balance towards ed spending. So all those three components all get backed out, and once we have removed them from our total expenses, what's left is the amount that we need to raise from our local taxpayers.
And that's summarized on page 23.
So here's a projection of those offsetting revenues. Again, these are the things that are going to get backed out of our total expense so that we can make a calculation of what our per pupil education spending is. Those revenues include state and local grants and tuition payments, so money that we receive from sending districts to send their students here as tuition students, as well as our state and local grants. There's our special education block grant that I just mentioned. Where I say federal grant funds, that's the combination of the two. We have our Medicaid, we have special funds, and the fund balance transfer. So we take the sum of all of those sources. That's that $10.3 million that you can see there at the bottom, and that's going to get backed out. So total offsetting revenues comes out of total expense in that middle line to yield education spending. And you can see there, $41,372,610 is our projected FY26 education spending. That represents a 3.32% growth. The way we got from 2% to 3.32% is because of the change in revenue from year to year. So we saw a slight tick down in revenue, which messed with our total expense there to yield that final percentage. That gives us our ed spending amount. The next thing that we have to do is plug in our long-term weighted average daily membership, which as an acronym is LTWADM.
We didn't invent that.
No.
It's still missing a good flashy brand name.
Our legislators did it for it.
You can see here in that line that we have a 10% uptick in our LTWADM this year, and that is largely due to a better reporting of students living in poverty data as a result of a move from free and reduced lunch forms to a direct certification process, which identifies students at different points outside of the school district, such as Medicaid and Dr. Dinosaur, SNAP food benefits, DCF would be another one, there's a few of them. And the data collected out there comes to us directly and says, this is a student living in poverty, we're going to count them as either they still keep the free and reduced bands for each one of those based on the percentage of the federal poverty line that family is living in. That uptick and sort of, it's giving us a better, more accurate profile of the demographic makeup of our district. And so we've been able to actually raise our pupils, which lowers our amount of spending per pupil. We've gone from $16,099 to $15,098. And so that difference of 6.2% represents a year-to-year decrease in ed spending per pupil, which is good news for the taxpayers. I included this data table here. It's also in the budget book, largely to give you an idea of how LTWADM is calculated and what it's made out of. I was chatting with Barb today about how we even read this table, because I understand that it's dense and hard to understand, but it's important to note that town of residence is the first source that the state looks at. Where do people live, regardless of what grade level? So where you see town of residence, that's for all elementary school, middle school, preschool, and high school students living in that town. It's not that there are 122 students at Bridport Elementary School, it's that there are 122 Bridporters in ACSD, okay?
So this is page 27, for those of us who are challenged.
Each one of those students, each one of those 122.32 Bridporters and everyone else gets a 1.0 FTE assigned to them. So now they all count as one. Pre-K students count as less than one because they don't go to school as much. So in the next column over, we back out some weight for those preschool students to reduce their FTE to 0.46 per pupil. Middle school and high school students get to add to their one. So they have their one in the first column, and whether they're a middle school or high school student, they get added weight in those middle and secondary columns. So by the end of that yellow section, we will have accounted for every student based on their town of residence, and additional weight for upper grade levels and less weight for our pre-K students. Okay? The next three chunks, green, red, and purple, correspond to demographic weights that are added to our district. You can see I shaded the FPL for Bridport because that's something that we're still working with the state on to make sure that it's accurate. But anybody who is a free or reduced lunch student in the old nomenclature or in the new nomenclature, living at or below the federal poverty line is reflected there, along with the weight that they bring in. That stacks on top of the weight that they received in the initial grade level weighting. Similarly, English language learners, ELL or EL, receive weight for additional demographic weight. In the purple column, we add weight for all students because our entire district has been deemed a sparse district of the lowest band, which means we get 0.7 weight added to each student, and that completes the weighting profile. So we take the ADM, which is the average enrollment, average daily membership, averaged over 2 years. How many kids were at school for the first month of school on average this year and last year? Smush all that together, that's that first column. We add the weights, we add the demographic weights, and then we sum it all up, and that gives us our total LTW ADM.
You must stay up all night.
He does.
I usually have the opposite effect on people, so I'm glad that you're engaged. I was going to sell these for sleep aids. Okay. We're now at the tax rate, and if you, just to bring you back to that 6.22% decrease in per pupil ed spending, that becomes the amount that we use to generate the district tax rate. So,
I know the best news is on page 31. Is there another?
yeah, I'm gonna move quickly towards the punchline. We have taken our total expense. We've backed out the revenue. We've gotten our ed spending. You can see that
Page 29.
we've now taken our LTW ADM and got our per pupil ed spending. Now we're going to get the adjusted equalized district tax rate calculation. Okay, and that's this one here. The good news is nobody understands it. The common level of appraisal is this factor that the state applies to the district tax rate to make sure that each town pays their fair share of taxes. If a town's property values are higher than the neighboring town, we want an equalizing factor that makes everybody, helps everybody pay their fair share. Historically, over the last 3 years, property values have increased in Vermont such that they were out of whack with this formula, and we're giving these wild post-CLA tax rates. So the district would say, your tax rate's going to be $1.10, and then after the CLA, it would be $1.95. And people were saying, what the heck's going on? The CLA is out of control, and what even is a CLA? And it was causing a lot of confusion. And so in order to cushion the landing between the district tax rate and the CLA, the state created an adjustment factor that applies the average CLA to all tax rates before they're presented, so that the sticker shock of applying the CLA is lessened. That's all it does. Okay? So when we say adjusted EDTR, that's the EDTR adjusted by the state average CLA. And that's about it for what you need to know here. You can see that $1.63 is where we landed as our adjusted and discounted, because remember the discount from the drivers, equalized district tax rate. For the sake of comparison, if we strip the adjustment, everything that I just talked about, off, and just look at it unadjusted, it would be a 22% decrease in the tax rate. Okay? So apples to apples, unadjusted to unadjusted, this budget creates a 22% decrease in the district tax rate. We still have to add the town CLAs in, which are also adjusted, to get our final town tax rate projection, which you can see here.
That's page 31.
Thank you. So we're taking the $1.63 from this slide, bringing it forward, and you can see these projected adjusted CLAs, which are also adjusted by that state factor of 0.72%. That's how you get to 149% CLA for Bridport or 135% CLA for Salisbury. The higher the CLA, the lower the tax rate.
Can't we make it more complicated?
Yeah, we are working on it.
Yeah.
Long story short, the action is summarized in that final column with percent change tax rates by town year to year. And you can see that for 3 of our towns, there's substantial decreases in tax rates ranging from 44 to 49%. And for the other member towns, also receiving discounts in the 5 to 15% range. So based on this spending plan as we've put it together and the year-to-year change in CLAs, we are providing a budget that gives our students more and costs our taxpayers less, which is a win-win and, you know, something that we're happy about achieving. Last but not least, we have our reserve funds, which matter, and we want to just summarize them here. We have our fund balance, which the board has designated to capital reserves. We hold 2 reserve accounts, ed reserves and capital reserves. The education reserve will have a balance at the end of FY25 of $2.333 million. The capital reserves.
Page 48.
Will have a balance of 3.8.
Do you want to just read, Matt, the totals of the reserve accounts again?
Mm-hmm. So, the education reserve is expected to have a balance of $2,333,264 at the end of this year. That includes carry forward from fiscal year 20, as well as the transfer of surplus from fiscal year 19 authorized by the voters for transfer to the education reserve fund. And that amount was $1,282,303. The capital reserves, which is funds set aside for the sake of capital improvements to our facilities and buildings, and has to be spent on a 5 years from when it was designated to the account, is expected to have a balance of $3,826,295 at the end of fiscal year 25. This includes the transfer of surplus from fiscal year 23, authorized by the voters for transfer, in the amount of $2,033,842. And that was a big fund balance because that was an ESSER year. Well, the fund balances that we're seeing now, 1.2 to $1.5 million, are more in line with what we would consider a reasonable margin of surplus for a $50 to $51 million budget.
Questions?
And that's it.
I do have a question. So, if I'm understanding correctly, there is no place in these adjustments where income is factored in, it's only property value.
That's a great question. 2/3 of Vermonters receive an income sensitized tax credit. And when you ask if it could get more complicated, the answer is yes. The income tax credit is sort of in a reimbursement model where it lags a year. So based on the taxes that you filed for 2023, you will receive income discount on your property, income sensitized discount or credit towards your property taxes for FY25 or 2025. The income is very difficult to present because it's on a range of property values. So if you imagine a matrix, property value and income are 2 variables. And so you can't say that, somebody who's living in a $350,000 home across several income bands is going to have this tax profile, or somebody living in a $200,000 home. It's so personal and so specific to an individual's status that we don't include it as part of the presentation, but it is part of the formula used for people who are paying taxes based on income.
And when we file our taxes in April, we fill out a homestead, I forget the number on that form.
Homestead
It's
declaration.
based on that information that the state, and then your current income tax that you're submitting, that the state determines what it will be, and that'll be what it applies to the following year.
So the state sets 3 yields or 3 rates in the December 1st letter. The property yield is the one that we pay the most attention to because it's the one that affects property taxes and the district tax rate. It's the most important one for us. There's also an income yield. So for the state will set an income yield and say anyone who makes at or under this amount, that counts as 1 yield, which equals $1 of taxes that that person is obligated to. I think it's about $17,000 of income equals 1 yield, aka $1 of taxes if you're purely on income. It also sets a non-homestead rate for rental properties, second homes, businesses, industry. Anybody who's not a homestead pays at a fixed non-homestead rate, which is generally kept in line with the homestead rates, sometimes a little bit higher, but it's one of the levers that the state has that they can manipulate in order to determine how much revenue they're going to bring in from taxes. Of course, you don't want to scare all of your economy away by pushing the non-homestead rate up so high that everybody moves out of the state with their business, and you don't want it to all fall on the homesteaders either, and so that's the balance that they have, right? And one thing that's been discussed at the legislature is breaking out second home owners from the non-homestead to have a 4th lever, being able to increase taxes on second homes without affecting the state economy.
I think the important thing is to remind ourselves what we have control over, and that is the education we're providing to the kids in our care. And we can do the best we can to try also to promote affordability as is needed, and hopefully this demonstrates that we've done that. Legislature still has the ability to change some of those factors, which will make the chart that we love so much on page 31 may or may not come to fruition, right? You know, that really depends on choices that the legislature made. And I think everybody up there is also mindful of the need for affordability, and so is working hard to do that too. We're in charge of making sure that the education is done well, for the 1,750 kids in our care here in Addison Central, and hopefully, that's represented well in the materials that we've seen.
Just a question, if there's a big change on the state level after the budget's passed, like universal meals go away on the state level, and the budget's already passed, is that something that the board has the power to allocate funds from a reserve for, or what happens if one of those revenue streams is thrown out of whack by the legislature?
Yeah, so if any revenue stream is out of whack, either because actually more often federal funding, there'll be a change in federal funding, even in years that are maybe not as tumultuous as we are experiencing right now. If that's the case, then we administratively look at, okay, what else has changed and how can we manage that service based on what's there. Matt mentioned that in the board line, there's a $450,000 contingency fund. There's a bit of that can be utilized in those circumstances if necessary. In the specific case of universal meals, if they were to decide that they're not giving us that grant, then we would internally look at, okay, what is that cost? What are our options, and how would we move forward? So we could perhaps cushion some of that internally. The board could use educational reserves and authorize, that use, through the right process for that. We wouldn't have to make that change on a dime, but obviously that's something that we would hope that the state would provide. That would be a very controversial decision on a dime to ensure that kids that have been provided food and families that have appreciated that routine are no longer able to get that with very little notice. I would highly doubt that would go without a great deal of scrutiny.
So in a post-universal meals landscape, you'd also still have free and reduced, right? So income qualified free meals and reduced meals, and you would just add back in paid meals, which would pass the cost back to the families who were, you know, income qualified to afford that, and that would be another revenue that would come in.
That would be a choice.
And that would, we'd have the choice.
That we could choose
Yeah.
to do that if we wish to do that as an option.
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to mention is going through the budget process this year. It was so different, right? You know, as Dr. Baker would talk about, you know, let's start by just not assuming anything. And she would basically say, let's move all the furniture out on the lawn and then place it in. And it was, instead of just saying, oh, we had a budget of X, so we're going to increase it by 5%, whatever, we actually got to see where all the funding went. And savings in one area actually then helped us to pay for much needed expenses to move towards our strategic plan, where we're really seriously looking at outcomes and really trying to, you know, bridge that gap between those of lesser means and those that aren't, as well as just improve in general. And so we, I believe, have this wonderful foundation now that we can really start to build upon. And even as things happen statewide, we can see what the impact is and how it will impact us, as there's lots of things going on at the state level as well. And so I just really appreciate, you know, here, you know, we made this decision as a board that we wanted to do equity-based budgeting, right? And we did it, and I should say they did it, and educated us along the way. And now you look at it and you think, well, this is the only way it should be done, right? And I think we can honestly say we're one of the few districts in the state that is doing it at this level. I think others are, you know, moving towards it, but we actually did it. And so I really want to commend Dr. Baker and Matt and her whole team for doing this. And now we have, you know, principals and buildings. They're looking at the whole district, not just their universe, which is wonderful, right, across the district. So I just am really appreciative of all the hard work that went into this. And the nice thing is the tax rate goes down too, and we were able to accomplish this.
This is one of the clearest school budgets I have ever seen in 50 years of
Awesome.
attending these meetings.
Thank you, thank you, awesome.
All right. Can I make a comment? Excuse me. Yeah, comment also. You know, having sat on school boards for a long time and seeing the progress to what is really a state education system in whatever way we call it, and it's become more and more and more complicated. So for any of us, either school board or taxpayers, parents, or whatever, trying to figure it all out, it is wickedly crazy. And Matt made it sound pretty good. You know, in all of the difficulties and the many letters that we have to describe. However, we have to work within that system. And your question, I thought, was excellent relative to what happens if universal meals goes away, not in the budget cycle, so to speak. I don't know. We'll have to see. The governor wants it to go away. And he last year made some changes or pressures after all this process had occurred, which caused lots of confusion, anxiety, and honestly, people being mad. Sort of happening this year a little bit too, but we'll see. And I guess the confusion and the complication certainly isn't us. And to take it from the taxpayer in a Middlebury and how they fund their schools, it goes through this huge mixing bowl to finally come out with a number at the end. And so I appreciate everybody's diligence in listening, honestly, because it is pretty, we've heard it now for months and months, right? And we all still don't totally understand it.
Steve?
Yes, thank you very much to Dr. Baker and her team, but I wanted to single out Matt in particular.
Steve, can you raise your volume level?
Thanks. I wanted to single out Matt in particular. You asked how can you make it more complicated. If you've been a teacher, you know that to be able to instruct people on it, you have to really understand. And the amount that Matt left out that he understands, that he then passed on to us, is pretty amazing. And to add to that, how to make it more complicated. Does anybody here has everybody here experienced having a new baby? Guess who did that while he was doing this? My hat is off to Matt. I mean, every time I have worked with him, he has been amazing. And this budget is what we have come to expect from him. So thank you, Matt. And you deserve particular singling out here in this process.
Other questions of our management team or discussion? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Steve Barlett. I have a kiddo in Cornwall Elementary. I just had a question on page 15. It says this budget also dedicates resources to eliminate bias-based harm and strengthen informed and safe school community cultures for all students and staff. As a supporter of that goal, I'm just wondering if you could share what some of those resources might be, some examples. I know, like, those are a work in progress, but any opportunity to elaborate on that?
Okay. Yes. So Addison Central, I think over the past couple of years, as I understand it, has done a nice job coming into line and ensuring that kids have a better understanding of how not to treat each other. So when there are difficulties and differences, there are very specific, hazing, harassment, and bullying laws and policies in the state that just simply cannot be violated. And that's for some reason, a number of Vermont schools, those of us that have been, I'm a 9th generation Vermonter, those of us that have been in Vermont for a long time, over the past maybe 4 or 5 years, that something became very just strikingly present among our young people, in terms of how they began to treat each other just very poorly. And a lot of bias-based harm emerged in many places throughout the state, and this was no exception. So the work that the administrative team has done in the last couple of years has been to really develop consistent practices and policies to ensure that students get swift messages quickly around what is absolutely not okay, and quite frankly, work up our skills to be able to talk about that with students in ways that maybe some of us have never had to talk about because it's just not what our background has been. I think where we are now, it has moved us to hire a director of equity, inclusion, and restorative practice that will take that work and help shift it into building the kind of community that we want, not just ensuring that we don't have the negative treatment of each other that we can't have, which is a difference. And so there'll be some work that helps us to integrate curriculum materials in better ways that ensure that students of all ages are able to understand difference better and differently in order to be able to engage with each other more readily and in ways that promote the kindness, courtesy, and respect that every human being always deserves, particularly in school. And so where you have to come by law every day, So So those resources are very deliberate. There are 3 student response coordinators in the larger Middlebury schools that will be working with that director to ensure that that effort is led, and then the smaller schools will work with the principals in the smaller schools as well, so that we'll all be doing that together in terms of building that inclusive community, which is more complicated now than it used to be, you know. And but our kids are far up to that challenge, and I think very welcoming to that work. You know, it just needs to be intentional, and so we're getting about that.
All new positions.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Tanya Leiker. I'm the parent of 2 NUHS alum, including this one, and the chair of the Cornell Select Board. I have hopefully a quick technical question for you, Matt. You mentioned that there's been some adjustment to the CLA adjustment. Is that this coming year, or is that?
It's this year.
This is a new.
Yeah, this is the first year where the CLA adjustment is in effect.
Okay.
So I think the factor that they're using is 0.724. So essentially, they apply that factor. There's a table in the book that you're holding that'll show you kind of the flow chart of how it's applied, and then how the application cancels itself out at the end, so that you wind up with the same tax rate one way or the other. But yeah, this is the first year of it happening. Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Everybody good? Well, I guess we'll bring it to a conclusion. Thank you all for coming. We're adjourned.
Thank you.